Hello and welcome to On Second Thought, an ongoing conversation between two normal Christians who are making sense of a world in chaos. My name is Luke, and that is David across from me. It has been a few weeks since we've gotten together, but recent events have inspired what I think is a need for more discussion. David, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Okay.
Yeah, I struggle, with keeping a news addiction at bay.
A news addiction. You go down the rabbit hole deep.
And I've been way more successful in that than probably, I've had longer stretches of freedom. But over the last 19 days, it's generally gotten worse. But then ever since the assassination attempt, it got a lot worse. Yeah.
So tell me about this 19 days. What is that? What is that about?
Oh, so really ever since the debate. So the debate 19 days ago, if you think about just the series of events that have happened over the last 19 days, all really in Trump's direction, right? That you could really almost never, you could not put together a more even just from a political, if you just take a step back from a political science perspective, and you think about how would I line up events more strategically for one candidate, there's just no way you could script the last 19 days being as favorable as they are for Trump.
So Trump's got all these court cases going against him.
Right.
And they're getting thrown out. There was one that was the top secret documents. I remember hearing from my uncle, who's a lawyer, saying this is the one that's going to get him. Right? Yeah. And now it's just been thrown out completely.
Yeah.
Because the prosecutor in the case was a special prosecutor that didn't have any legal mandate for doing that. Is that correct? Inappropriately appointed?
So if we look at the last 19 days, you think about where we were 19 days ago, you had Trump, who did have a lead in the polls and did have a lead. And this is what I think also happens is a switch gets turned on where I just go to almost full political science, just analyzing what's going on. So 19 days ago, Trump was in a good position in the polls,
right,
having just lost his case though for the in the court in New York, right? And so he just got indicted, so he was a convicted felon, and his polls had actually started to go down a little bit after that, just a hair. And so now was the opportunity for Dems to think about, okay, maybe this debate's going to change things, and that's why Joe Biden took it, is because he knew that, hey, I'm actually down 2 points in the national polls, so we need to do it. So if you think about the series of events between where we were then and where we are now, you had probably the worst debate performance, just exposing
which totally transformed the conversation to be all about Biden.
For the next week and a half, it was all about Biden and the Democratic Party imploding from the inside in a civil war. Yeah. Nobody was talking about Trump, and Trump, just to his credit,
kept his mouth shut.
Just disappeared. The next time we see Trump, he's being shot at.
Yeah.
He then has, and then his response is.
What was your experience when you saw that clip for the first time?
So I was at the coast. I didn't get any texts. I don't know why I didn't get any texts. I think it was partially because my service wasn't great. So I hadn't gotten any texts. I walk into a McDonald's, and it's 3 hours after it happens. I look. It feels like it's out of a movie, but I look up at the screen, and you see it on the TV.
Oh my gosh!
He's being shot, and I'm just stunned, right? In that moment. But it's literally, I watched that clip. And I just watched it probably once through. I see his reaction, and I have been on the fence. I've actually been leaning towards I will vote for Kennedy just because.
So you see him in the midst of the huddle, and he's like, "I want my shoes," and you're thinking, "What's going to happen?" And then the fist comes over the top.
When he put his,
oh my gosh, what is going on?
When he put his fist up and said, "Fight, fight," it was that moment that I'm voting for Trump. There's just it clarified to me so much of actually the fact that we are not in a cultural moment where we have the luxury of finding the perfect. It's you have the warrior that you're given, and it's and ultimately I'm on that side. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that Christ is on that side or that to be a Christian you need to be on that side or anything.
Yeah.
But it means that I'm more aligned as a person, and my values are and there's just something to me. It was actually I was also reflecting on this later. That it was the first time I actually felt morally inspired by Trump. I don't think it was a political reaction. I don't think that that's how you respond when you're shot at.
Right.
I think that it comes from a deeper place of character, like below that, and his willingness to fight in the moment of like battle, actual battle.
Yeah.
That is inspiring.
I was explaining to my brother, who's not a Trump fan, I said, for all his faults, and there are many, and for all the ways I don't agree with them, in fact, I think he promotes things that I think are destructive, I think he cares about our country. Like, I think he does. He cares about himself, obviously, but there are no presidents that don't care about themselves primarily. You don't get to that job with a low self-esteem.
No.
But he cares. And I felt like that moment was it.
Yeah.
And you had that crowd of thousands who are like, what's going to happen? And now they're chanting USA, USA. As he's like,
the crowd's response is shocking. I mean, and I think Tucker, I heard Tucker talk about this yesterday, and Tucker said it's like a strong father or a strong leader. It's like you look to your father to how you're going to respond, or you look to the leader to how you're going to respond in a situation. And that crowd, you see it in that moment, they did not panic. Yeah. The crowd never panicked. And then they, instead of fleeing or going in a lot of different directions, which you might expect to happen when there's an open shooting situation, some sort of panic setting in.
Right.
It was like resolve set in. And especially like just where it went to when he was fighting this moment of like, and it didn't feel like to me it was as selfish, like I'm fighting. It felt like, no, I'm going to continue to fight for you. Right. We are going to continue to fight. Yeah. They're not going to take us down. And what was your reaction? How did you find out about it?
We'd been on the river, floating in the river, and I got off and pulled my phone out of the dry bag and had a series of texts from family members, and then wasn't able to see anything till we got home. And I watched the clip, and it was moving. I mean, I was moved to tears just in that sense of this is real. And to me, there's been this sense of foreboding that's been growing without an outlet or a sense of maybe I'm off, right? You know, you get this feeling of like, this feels like it's going to pop, but it doesn't. And so you think, well, maybe my perceptions have been off. I was going back through some of my old content from 2020 and beyond, right? After January 6th, when it felt that same way of like something's going to give here and it's not good. Mm-hmm. And so to me in this moment, it was like, okay, I'm not just out on a limb here. We are on the edge of something terrible, and yet we can take our stand.
That to me is the moment, right?
Yeah.
It's an amazing, I think, observation because I think that is what I felt. I felt deep down, and I do think there's a danger here in trusting in princes, right?
Yeah,
that's right. And I think moments like this maybe inspire too much loyalty, right? But that regardless, in a war, in earthly wars, right?
Yep.
You don't want to be stuck in a Spanish Civil War situation where you have the communists versus the fascists. Like, that's not what you want. You want to have a leader that you can follow and feel like, okay, this has a chance of preserving freedom and sending us in the right direction. And the most depressing, and that's where I had felt a little bit, honestly, until that moment, a little stuck of like, I don't know if even the Trump side is going to lead us in the right direction or going to be any better, really, ultimately, than the left. And that was a moment of clarity to me that no, it's the forces want him dead.
Yep.
It's like, it's the spirit of the age wants him dead. And that's the side. I mean, and he's not perfect, right? Absolutely not. And I don't agree with all of his stuff, and he's watered stuff down recently that I'm not been a fan of, but like, I don't have the luxury of finding the perfect candidate right now.
So it dawned on me that what is it? I was trying to put my finger on what the difference is between a Christian who's fighting politically and a non-Christian conservative, right? So Christian conservative, non-Christian conservative. Trump's definitely a non-Christian conservative in his way of thinking. Right?
Well, we haven't seen him speak since his
You're hoping for a conversion event.
Maybe that was a conversion event. We don't know yet, but yeah.
But what I see they represent is a nostalgia for like Top Gun America. Do you know what I'm saying? For the brash, outspoken,
the John Wayne,
out over the end of his skis. You know, I'm going to do this my way.
Yeah.
That sort of 80s America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Versus we want righteousness to be exalted.
Right.
But the reality is, too, is that, well, one, that 80s America is a true conservatism. You're trying to go back.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas
it is.
A true Christian political ideal is always forward in some level, right? But back to the sense that we honored God a lot more in the 80s than we do now.
No, I'm yeah, it's just one of those things. It's like we can't let 80s like the fact that let's say he does represent 80s America.
Yeah.
80s America's a heck of a lot better than 2024 America. I mean, like,
as far as
so many
God.
ways. In terms of honoring God,
Yeah.
the ability to raise a family that's not consistently.
You can buy a house for $50,000.
You can buy a house for $50,000, and so
Right.
I'm not saying that that's my long-term vision is not 80s America.
No.
But to think that you can go right from where we're at without any interim, without any stops at 80s America along the way is also just like you got to take some sort of progressive approach. I'm not.
Yeah. Okay, so well, here's the question that I was actually going to start with, but we dove right into Trump, and that is what's the role of prayer? I told this story on Sunday at church, and actually was reflecting about it with my mom about the song "It Is Well with My Soul," and she reminded me of the original writing of that song and its story. That the author of that song, or the composer, he was on a ship at sea, remembering his family having been lost at sea, writing this song of the peace of God in the midst of trial. And the story I told on Sunday was about a prayer movement in Medellin, Colombia in the late 80s that was started by a local pastor that grew to envelop the city into tens of thousands of people praying that righteousness would be revealed and that corruption would be destroyed in the government and in the cartels and in the culture, really. And it reminds me a lot of what is going on in the U.S. too, that our culture has rejected God, right? And this pastor was assassinated. He was shot down in the street the week before this scheduled prayer event that was going to be at the soccer stadium in Medellin. It was going to have 60,000 people come to it. And I saw an interview with this pastor's wife the day before the event saying, "Are you going to cancel it now that your husband has died?" And she recited the lyrics to this song, right? That, and I want to look it up here. But this idea of how could you not, right? And so this idea of that song and why it matters, or this prayer, is that the very next week was the week that Pablo Escobar was arrested. And actually, the U.S. military was involved in that. And, you can say, well, it was government. You can say it was foreign governments like our own. But I believe it was prayer that was breaking down the powers of darkness. And so, to me, and this convicted me of my own lack of prayer, to say, I think that it's just by my voice, just speaking up, that I think it can make a difference, right? That somehow I can do this without the power of God. What more arrogant thing could you concoct, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
I was, just reminds me a lot of, actually, there's an interview on Remnant Radio, and I just started it, but it's called Jesus and the Powers. And it's all about how seeing Jesus and seeing that we are it's actually talking about government.
Right.
And the ways in which the powers are the forces of powers, the darkness that
spiritual forces
the
of evil,
spiritual
in the
forces
realm.
of evil that have dominion, in a lesser dominion, right? In certain countries and areas that produce demonic results. And then I think about just finished Daniel, and I mean that's the best example, I think, of what you're talking about. That the fight that is happening, that Daniel takes, and he's fighting. I mean, he's fighting on behalf of his people.
Yeah.
For God's forgiveness. He's confessing on behalf of his people. He's like saying we don't deserve it.
It's a very charismatic thing to do.
To be remembered. And then what happens is the angel comes and tells him, right? That
your prayer have been heard.
Your prayers have been heard, and I have been busy fighting. The reason it's taken me 3 weeks to get here is that I've been fighting with the spirit of I forget which
Prince of Persia.
The Prince of Persia, right? With and so I think to me it's just that's a small window. Like I don't think it's giving us the full picture of what's happening, but I think it's like pulling back just the curtain a little bit into what actually is the spiritual situation.
Yeah.
And the spiritual reality. And that is why I do think when Paul's talking to Timothy, his primary thing his primary mode of political action is pray for your kings.
Yeah.
Pray for your kings. Pray for the people in authority so that you can have a quiet life, so that you can live in godliness. A good leader makes it a lot easier to be trained in godliness.
Yeah.
And live lives of godliness. And that is, that's why I think that passage, I think I sometimes even hurry past, like I don't take that very seriously in my own life, praying for kings, praying for leaders.
It feels like an obligation, but not like a power.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I think part of that is experiential too, because I have prayed prayers many a times for leaders in our state and the corruption and the backroom deals and the things that go on here that seem to sabotage goodness so many times in so many ways. It just feels like, but what difference did I make?
Yeah.
And part of that is not seeing into the spirit realm effectively. I think the other part is just not trusting when Jesus says, the things you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Yeah. I want to read this, the first part of that song, It Is Well. It says, when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. That's what she said. That's what that pastor's wife said on the street there. Yeah.
All right. One thing that I actually was reflecting on after that, and I think people have said it many times, and they've said it very maybe a little vaguely, but I've been kind of reflecting on it since then, is just, how close it was. Just how close, like...
that bullet.
That bullet, how close the bullet was to killing Trump.
Yeah.
It was like, I think his doctor said it was a quarter inch from killing him.
Well, and not only a quarter inch, but just a turn of the head.
A turn, yeah.
Because that would have gone to through the back of the skull.
And I think that it was not only a quarter inch from him dying.
Right.
I think that it was a quarter inch from the most likely scenario that I could see for civil war in America. Like the most likely scenario.
Yeah.
Especially when you see even the response of the people right when he gets into the car. If you watch all the people on the video, they all turn around and immediately start cussing, and the anger and vitriol was directed immediately at the media. The blame was immediately there, like in people's hearts. You're the reason. And I think if it happens the other way and he goes down, I think it's very possible there's an immediate reaction. That's to blame. Yeah.
Like if you look at, I've looked a little bit at the Iraq War, and America basically just took their government out, and it was a strongman government. They dismantled it overnight and refused to put anything in its place. And so what they got was essentially civil war with America in the middle trying to stop it.
In Iraq.
And they couldn't in Iraq. Yeah. And so hundreds of thousands of people died in their civil war that our media agreed to not talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And estimates up to 1 million. And what it is in that chaos, when you enter chaos like that as a country, it's every petty vendetta. It's locals I haven't liked this guy for a long time, and they go commit murder that they would never do in a normal circumstance. And then, like you're saying, everybody who fits a category that's to blame, right? That's within my narrative of these, whether it's the media or you think of the Democrat offices or any government office becomes a risk.
Right, because they let this happen.
Yeah. And then
police maybe
forces,
they did this, yeah.
And so then what you get is a temptation for local warlords to rise up and say, well, I'll create peace, right? The governor's not going to do it. The police are helpless. I'll start ruling this region. And then the warlords fight each other.
I thought it was very likely. Anyway, like this is what I thought was incredibly likely, that we would be on the precipice of it, and that martial law would have been called probably that day.
Yeah.
At the very least. Maybe it was able to be somehow tamped down by a strong, maybe like alternative rising right away. But that's the only way I could really see averting it. But then I was thinking about, okay, well, then why? And then if you've heard Trump, I think he says that was the one he pulled that slide up early in his talk, and he had never done that before. That's what I think I heard.
The slide
that
was
right.
about border crossing.
Yeah, and so normally he's looking straight, and if he was looking straight, he would have died.
Yeah.
And he said it was only because he had pulled that slide up and was moving it. And he says he normally doesn't do that. It was the first time he had done that early in his event. And then I was thinking about, and then you've heard people say Providence saved him, right? Providence saved him.
Right.
And I just started to think about this, like, people pray a lot for Trump.
Yeah.
Like a lot, and I think it may not always be the best motives, right? But it's especially in charismatic circles, especially in circles like that are pretty hardcore, like he is probably one of the more prayed for people presidents or people in the earth.
Yeah.
And I think that in that moment, like, God's providence obviously over history, but also just the direct answer to prayers.
Yeah.
To preserve his life, but also to preserve us from absolute chaos and continue to give us more opportunities to turn and to turn to him.
Yeah.
I actually think it was a rare moment where I stopped to think about, I actually think my prayers, not my prayers, because I haven't been praying for him very well, but other people's prayers were heard.
Yeah.
In a political realm.
You know what dawns on me? And because I ordered a MAGA hat.
I actually...
Did you as well?
I'm about to.
About to.
That was literally, I told the lady, I said, I'm getting the red hat.
It took me a couple days. I was going to buy it like 2 days ago, and then it was like looking for, I want the right one. Yes. Do I want a red one? Like a real red one?
I know.
Because the black ones are okay, and it's like, no, I got the red one.
You have to be a red, yeah.
But here's one of the things that I immediately recognized in myself is that everyone I've ever seen with a MAGA hat on is 60 or older. Okay?
Yeah.
And really what this is it's the younger generations. And my mom, who works Republican booths at the fair here in Oregon, she said their number one audience for Trump gear, and this is going back years, is teenagers. Because what better way to rebel at school than to wear Trump gear, right? But what she said was, or what I realized rather, was that this is restoring the children to their parents and to their grandparents.
Wow.
And so then that reminded me of this Amber Rose character.
Wow.
Speaking at the Republican National Convention about her arguments with her dad about Trump.
That's what stood out to me about that too.
Whoa, it's restoring this seemingly troubled woman to relationship of some quality with her father.
And when she just said, "These are my people," like, it was such an emotion.
Speaking about Trump people?
Yeah, because she goes and she said, these red hat wearing people, I started to talk to them, and I realized this was basically where I was at home.
Which is not the country club neocon conservatives.
No.
It's not the traditional Republicans at all, which is why they hate it so much. Because Matt Walsh was criticizing her a lot and got into a lot of heat the last couple of days. But I think what his impulse there is wrong. The reason it's wrong is because it's that turn up my nose that you're not one of us.
It's the tax collectors and sinners trope.
Yes.
It is. It's the tax collectors and sinners trope.
Yeah.
And that is the impulse.
Now, wait. We have to be careful a little bit.
I'm going to go a little bit
because we're not equating Trump to Christ.
No.
We're not saying Trump gathers them like Jesus does.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
And we're not equating Republicans
this is important.
to Christians.
This is important.
Okay, all right.
This is important. You're right. I agree with this. Yes. I agree with this. However, I think there is a real way, and I actually think that makes this a stronger point.
Okay.
Right? Because I don't think that someone who's living her lifestyle should be allowed to speak at church. Right? Like, who's unrepentant in that lifestyle.
She's an unrepentant.
Right.
Pornography. She's all kind of
a lot of things.
Mess.
Yeah. Rapper, pornography. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
Well, rappers can go to church.
Yeah, rappers.
Okay, but what were you saying?
But my point is that it's this impulse to say. Well, actually, I think that the impulse is to say this should be a church, and so no one who's allowed to speak at church should be able to be allowed to speak here, which is weird to me. Like, why is that? Why shouldn't someone be allowed to be a political ally and not be allowed in the same political party? But I do think that actually there's a deeper impulse, and the impulse is, I think, the impulse that says, no, we're not like that. That person's too bad for us.
Yeah.
We're better than those people. And that impulse, I think, especially in a political realm, is actually saying, no, guys, who's in our party? There's a lot of godless conservatives in our party who are just as sinful as she is. Because this isn't the church. Like, this isn't...
But here's the problem that I see.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I think so, but part of it is the only thing that got her in the door besides her fame, right? That she has a large following on the internet.
It's like 20 million. It's like a lot.
Yeah, right. But what got her that podium was that she's saying, I'm for Trump.
Right.
Which as a Christian, I don't want Trump to be the defining characteristic of our Republican conservative movement.
Yeah.
But you can't avoid it. You can't avoid it.
He is. I mean, it is. I mean, at this point, you could probably call it the Trump party.
But that's why, like, Lindsey Graham still gets good mentions from Trump. Because in public, he'll praise him, even though he's stabbing him in the back rooms.
No, I'm not saying... I mean, he's not Jesus. I mean,
Trump's not Jesus.
Yeah.
I agree.
He's a lot closer to Samson. You know what I mean? Like, he's a lot closer to a Samson figure, an Old Testament, like...
Which our
flawed figure who is used.
Yeah, our era of America is very much like the Judges, where we're descending into... We started out with the law, and everybody following it until now we've descended to everybody doing whatever they want.
No, but I think that, like, but the only reason anybody's up there is because they are somewhat famous and support
and they
Trump.
pro-Trump. That's
like
true.
That's the only reason anyone gets on that stage is because ultimately they've said, I'm pro-Trump, right? Like that's and most of the people on that stage are there because they're pro-Trump and a politician. Yeah. As opposed to and it wouldn't matter. I think Nancy Mace, whatever, like classic example of like a Republican congresswoman who's about as immoral as you could be, but we're fine with Fox News interviews about her. I mean, I'm not fine with it, but like Republican world generally is.
She's when you say as immoral as you can be.
I mean, she's like not as immoral as you can be, but she's just like
She's not Christian moral.
She's not moral. She lives a sinful lifestyle, right?
Right. But I mean, if you took surveys of the evening activities of your Congress members,
oh my gosh,
she would be par for the course. The only
difference,
right? She'd be normal.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
Okay.
And actually, J.D. Vance is one of the few, like who he selected as his vice president, who actually likes his wife.
I heard that too. That's a pretty good line.
No, it's like who actually probably doesn't live that lifestyle, right? So anyway, we've talked a lot about. Well, I
want to give this a little more
prayer.
time. And then
you were
we can
talking
move
about
forward.
prayer, and I think we could focus back. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I would go back to prayer and say, I think if this event or the events that are going on right now are going to make a lasting difference in our culture, it will be because it awakens people to pray and get engaged in the spiritual war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there's incredible potential for it to be a false moment because we put all our hope again in Trump, right?
Yes.
As opposed to saying, no, we have to be called to realize there is a God above Trump who did preserve Trump in this moment. And he is the one who gives authority to all kings and all princes.
Well, there's also a reason why I didn't buy a hat that says Trump on it.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think
it says it on the back. But
yeah, he says
it was small.
It just says 45.
Small writing.
But ultimately, no, you're completely right. The hope, and I think I have to be really aware of this in my own heart. The hope, the call, is to radical prayer, and to calling people towards radical prayer for politics, for all life, for God to move in a revival and conviction and judgment, like all of those things that we want God's mercy and grace to be shown.
Okay, so that makes me think about the next question, which is what's the role of ministers in this political? And by ministers, I mean people who represent the church, right? Which you and I do on occasion. But neither of us are head pastors. But how does that work? And do we reserve things for the pulpit? And so it reminds me of we had somebody come to my school, a friend of mine who studied deeply the Revolutionary War. And he gave a talk on what he calls the Black Robe Regiment. He doesn't coin that term, obviously. It's been around a long time. The Black Robes meaning Christian ministers who wear black robes in church, who then were leading, both ministers and deacons, leading in battle in the Revolutionary War. And that America's been this sort of Christian nation or at least nation of Christians, right? Where Christianity leads the culture, if not the church leading the government. And I'm okay with that. I don't think the church should necessarily lead the government at all.
Yeah.
Right? So what I'm wondering, though, is where does that boundary come from that we feel, because I feel it too, of saying, okay, the church isn't endorsing Trump, which I don't think I want our church endorsing Trump.
I don't want our church endorsing Trump.
Right?
Just to be fair. I think it's...
Or the Republicans at all.
Yeah.
I want our church to denounce Democrats. And in fact, I don't even necessarily want them to renounce Democrats. I want them to renounce the issues that Democrats promote.
Right.
Right? Which is not only now same-sex marriage, but we're working toward pedophilia.
Yeah.
I mean, California just passed a law protecting men who have sex with teenagers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Young boys. And transgender mutilation of children. Like all of these issues that are not only heartbreaking, but infuriating on a moral level.
Well, actually, I want you to start this conversation because I feel like you were mentioning as we were starting that you feel like there's been some like reflection that you've been thinking about just your approach and what. And so I would love to kind of hear a little bit of where are you at in this conversation? What you think about it?
Well, I mean, be more specific. What was I saying before? Because
you said that you've been reflective a lot. Like even right before Trump, the stuff with Trump happened, you said there was a lot of reflection happening about like, are we in the right spot in the war? Like, I don't quite. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that self-reflection that you're doing, and then how you feel like it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I was referring to before, but my reflections have been kind of what I've been saying about, one, am I really praying and trusting that this is God's movement, right? Or am I trying to make a movement go myself?
That's good.
And the last few years of me trying to be far more socially engaged, since 2020 than I ever was. And really I was before that, with videos for parents and all that sort of thing, and starting its own controversy around stuff that now seems silly, like bullying and of elementary kids. I mean, bullying's not silly, but it's silly in retrospect, what people got so offended by. I want to be part of what God's doing, right? And I think that's the right sense too for politics.
Yeah,
is that if Trump is part of what God's doing, then let's back what God's doing. Not back Trump.
Not back Trump. I think that's so good. Let's back what God's doing, not Trump. But what he's doing.
And
I think there's a moment when
right?
you see a bullet barely miss someone's head, where it does make you stop and think.
Maybe God's doing something. Yeah. So what I think a lot of Christian leaders are getting wrong is that they've excluded Trump from that category of being part of what God's doing.
Yeah.
Because it's almost, and I think
because God is only allowed to use Christians, apparently.
I think it's that same Matt Walsh turn your nose up to say, well, he's not one of us.
Yeah.
And therefore he's not part of what God's doing. And it reminds me of the angel of the Lord coming to Joshua, where Joshua says, are you for us or for our enemies? And he says, I'm for neither.
I'm for neither.
Yeah.
No, that, so I guess to answer your question on pastors, ministers, interaction on that, because I think that's probably one of the, like, I think seeing what the Father is doing and joining him in that work is what life's about. And it's so easy to kind of make it like, I think this is a good thing, therefore I'm going to go do the thing.
Yeah.
Like that just doesn't usually work. So I think, and that's where you discover also is in prayer. It was Steve Deace today, and Steve Deace is a political commentator and that I listen to from time to time. He frustrates me at times. Like, this is not an endorsement of everything he says, but today, man, I agree with almost everything he said. And he was saying that, and I 100% agree with this. He says, we have to really, like, while we're doing this, we have to remember to leave a lot of space for people's consciences, more than we ever have before. Because, like, you can have a Christian who watches the RNC and see that there's a Sikh prayer at the end, which there was. There's a Sikh prayer at the end, and there were 3 Christian prayers. And, like, can watch that and be like, all right, I'm out. Like, I cannot, like, this is not the party I'm going to be a part of. And I think someone should be allowed to do that and shouldn't be, like, criticized, like, like that's their conscience doing that.
Well, it doesn't have to be, there's a lot of steps between I'm out, this isn't my party, and saying this shouldn't happen.
Right, exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just saying, but if someone arrives there honestly with their conscience, like, I don't think that you should, like, I don't think it's the role of a minister, for example, or the role of a Christian to be like, wrong to do that. Like, I think that politics, actually, there is a lot of room for conscience in how you apply your biblical beliefs to a particular thing.
Wait, are you saying a pastor shouldn't say that the Republicans shouldn't be having prayers to false gods?
No. That's not what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
A pastor should absolutely say that.
Yeah.
100%. And I'm fine saying that. They should not have, and that was the number one thing. This was wrong to do, right? But a pastor should not then go and say to a particular congregant, you now can't vote Republican, or you should still vote Republican. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The particular application of responding to that wrong thing should still be that individual person's decision and conscience, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is Trump. We've been in this world for a while with Trump. Trump has presented this singular person where you're like, there's a lot of room for conscience in how you respond to the person of Trump.
Wait, but aren't we saying, I'm
sorry,
kind of backtracking it. But
backtrack.
Don't we also agree, though, that there's a line you can cross where you can now say, and I think the Democrats have crossed that line.
Right.
So what is the line where you can say, well, Democrat, I don't think you can vote with a clear conscience for a Democrat, but that doesn't mean you have to vote for Republican. How do you know the lines?
I think there's definitely something different with teens saying it's wrong and you can't be a Christian.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, there's room for conscience, like right of a certain point.
Okay.
And I think they're mostly about social issues, like 100% just about social issues. I don't think that you can make as many moral claims about economic policy, for example, that you can on like certain moral positions. But I think that
wars could definitely be in that category.
Yes, wars could be in that
moral
category.
issues more than social.
Yes, moral issues more than moral social issues more than economic issues, I think.
Okay.
But even that, anyway, all I'm trying to say is maybe I should just clarify, get back to the point. This is back to the point. I do think that a pulpit, I would be very careful still, always like endorsing a political candidate or particular party. But I would be okay with absolutely saying like these things, these policies that are advocated absolutely more on the left side and seem to be a demonic movement within the left side of the country.
Yeah.
These are evil and must be resisted. And you can maybe have differences about how you resist that, or maybe you're still convinced by maybe Catholic social teaching, for example, that you should still support a particular Democratic candidate because of their, I don't know, like those arguments are basically getting less and less tenable.
Well, and what I see, the argument I've heard people Christian or trying to appeal to Christians, as far as Democrats go or the left, is simply a general argument for compassion. Well, we're the ones who care about the immigrants.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, okay, so they're getting like trafficked by the cartel, and so billions of dollars is funding to the cartel because of the open border. Are you pro-cartel? And they're like, well, no, it's just the feeling.
Right.
Like, okay.
Well, I mean, this is the reality.
You don't actually want to help. You just want to feel like you helped.
Yeah, think about the Catholic Church. It's a really good example. Like Catholic voting base.
Yeah.
Has been largely leans Democratic over the last ever since JFK, really.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with Catholic social teaching, and a lot to do with they were convinced over the fact that, well, the civil rights thing happened, right? That's one thing.
Yeah.
But also the fact that Catholic social teaching does say that they are convinced that the government should play a role in caring for poor people, right? That's really what it comes down to.
Okay.
That there is a role for compassion in government economic policy.
Yeah.
So, like, that argument is basically the reason why Catholics have been Democrat for the last 40 years.
That's interesting because in my mind, as I'm trying to put myself in that position of the rationale of someone who's Catholic, when you think of your church as being globally powerful, right? That any national government is on par, if not dwarfed, by the power of the Catholic Church globally. Then, okay, you start to feel like, well, I'm part of this big and powerful thing. These governments should submit to our moral demands by doing the moral thing that we require. Right?
Yes.
Okay. When we come from, as Protestants, very localized, smaller congregations, we see the government as this big and powerful thing. We want that big, powerful thing to diminish, which to me makes sense why America and its traditional mentality of minimal government,
Yeah.
that would be a distinctly Protestant idea.
Yeah.
I've never thought of that before.
Yeah. But that's why, but I don't think it's a question of salvation. Like, does that make
Yeah.
sense? Does that make sense? So I do think, though, that's becoming a less and less tenable point, which is actually why I think you see more and more Catholics going Republican.
Yeah.
So all that to say, I would still be like in my gut, it feels very wrong, and I think that it is wrong. Or I would be very hesitant, right, to use a pulpit to say you should vote for Trump, right? Because that's such a specific application of a general like worldview, right?
Right.
But do I think it is completely appropriate to use the pulpit to say you have to resist the transing of your kids? Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's far more relevant if you think of what actual difference you're going to make in your local church.
Yeah.
Preaching that, hey, we are going to resist this local school board's policies around this specific thing that affects our children.
Yeah.
You're going to have way more impact than if you say to the 200 people that are listening, go vote in Oregon's election. And whatever difference that might make.
Exactly right. But I do think on a personal level, to me, I do think there's a point at which the personal pastor, right,
Yeah.
or an individual pastor still has a freedom to follow their conscience. On a personal level, you take the collar off or whatever. You're not not on a Sunday service. Although, to be honest, this was incredibly common during the Revolutionary War to preach basically that.
I can't remember who the guy was. There was one famously who pulled his robe off from the pulpit, and underneath it was a uniform.
Yes.
And said, we're marching right now.
We're marching right now.
And like left church with all the men.
It's crazy. But so I think there is a point. There's a point at which it does. There's a point at which you do get over that line where you have to be a Bonhoeffer, right? Where you have to say, no, like it's too evil. Like there is no neutrality. Like you have to join the resistance, and whatever that resistance, and that means you're usually partnering with the French resistance. Or you're partnering with the resistance the German resistance, which is not a Christian thing,
right?
But you have to partner at times to say, no, this evil, whatever this evil is, should be resisted at some level.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're there. We're not at a wartime mentality, but I do think you say, sorry.
Well, this is what just war theory is about.
Yeah.
Right. Just war theory says, you have to meet these requirements before you can justify violent action.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not that violence is never the action; it's that it's the last resort.
That's right.
And if you haven't made it the last resort, you're not doing it right.
That's right.
In fact, you are feeding evil.
But I think I would just say on a personal level for a pastor.
Yeah.
I think that a pastor still has the freedom to be able to say what their opinions are on a one-to-one level, right? Or even on like not in a pulpit level.
I'm sort of well known, right?
Yeah.
At least in our small circles.
Yeah.
For saying my opinions on Facebook and the like, right? I've never had any pushback from anybody to say, well, wait, aren't you a Christian, or aren't you aren't you in some leadership role at church, and therefore you shouldn't be doing this?
I had this fear when I joined council that like me being a pastor almost was at odds with being on city council, because it was like, well, how can I minister to people if I like disagree with them vehemently on council?
Right.
And then I just got to this point of like, no, like being a pastor, living out your calling has multiple elements.
Right.
And one of those can be pastor, one of those can be a counselor, and your goal is to just be faithful.
Yeah.
And let the chips fall a little bit. Like
and if one of the things that's interesting is, and this is the balance, when you're finding those places that are conscience, that you don't call them sin.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And I remember once having a conversation with a group of Christians where I brought up the young earth versus old earth creation, right?
Really good point. Yeah.
And somebody was like, well, it's young earth because that's what the Bible says, and anyone who says otherwise is in sin. And I said, oh, it's sin. So you're saying that you would break fellowship with someone, you would excommunicate him from your spiritual community.
Yeah.
And he sort of was like, well, I mean, no. Like he wasn't actually calling it sin. He just wanted to pontificate. Do you know what I'm saying? That's not right.
It's not right. And I think that there's these two impulses within me.
Yeah.
And the two impulses are this. One is that we have to be strong to fight the battle. Meet the occasion.
Yeah.
Meet the cultural occasion locally, nationally, where you're at, to have to take the responsibilities that God's given you as a citizen seriously. The second one is this, that Christ, Jesus, is yearning and praying for a united true church.
That's right.
And that means and will necessitate there will be people in that church who are both Republican and Democrat and who disagree on how you live out God's calling on a practical level and the way they vote. And I think that you can embrace both of those things. I think that one is probably more dangerous than the other.
So, yeah.
And they might be, I don't know.
I'm wrestling with that. I don't have a good answer yet. I mean, to the degree that in heaven, obviously there will be Republicans and Democrats, even current people today who will get it to heaven. Is Jesus going to say, well, you should have all voted this way? Do you know what I'm saying? Or is he going to say, well, it's going to depend on I don't know. I don't feel like I can ever take that position.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. All right.
I just know, I'll put it this way. I know they're Orthodox Christians, 100%. They're Orthodox Christians who are living even courageous lives, right? Mm-hmm. Who would vote for Joe Biden, like 100%.
And would you say of those Christians that was a sin that person committed?
I'm probably not at the level of saying it was a sin. Yeah. I would say I strongly disagree.
It's tough. Right?
I strongly disagree. I don't think I would say it's a sin, though. I don't think I would bind someone's conscience in that way. I think I would give my arguments and say, this is why I think X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. That's interesting. Because if I was going to say firmly, and I have said, it's a sin, then I would also then need to be willing to break fellowship with someone over it. Right? That's what a sin is. Because if someone doesn't repent of sin, you go to them, you bring someone with you, and then you treat them like
and that's why I think I would be really uncomfortable saying it's a sin. Because but I think there's also like that's the thing. When you have a difference of theology, so let's say like you have a difference of theology.
Okay.
So let's say a cessationist, so someone who doesn't believe the gifts of the Spirit have continued, cessationist, versus a continuationist.
Right.
I feel very strongly in my continuationist position that the gifts of the Spirit continue and are active, right?
So I would call cessationism a second tier issue.
But it's not a core doctrine to you need to believe this to be a Christian. And
I've learned recently there are different kinds of cessationists.
Yes,
right?
It is a spectrum.
I was listening to Doug Wilson, and he was talking about his cessationism, and I thought, oh, great. And then when he explained it, I was like, that's actually reasonable, you know?
No, it's like pretty close to how I practice.
What he was saying is like, miracles happen all the time. It's just that I don't think someone gets to be a prophet, right? They don't have to. You don't get the name badge that says you're the apostle or whatever.
Which I'm very uncomfortable with. Generally,
I was like, well, I mean, I'm not handing out name badges either. But
and that's exactly right. There's a huge spectrum, and he would be actually very comfortable saying a lot of those experiences are all from God.
Yep.
Like he's actually really comfortable in the past, basically partnering with like people from like Bethel and doing things, which is just from the outside you think that doesn't make sense. But all that being said, there has to be a room to be able to say I strongly disagree passionately. And I think that it might actually be like a sin, like the way that you're living might actually be in disobedience to God, but not like an active, conscious rebellion against God. I don't know, like sin. Does that make sense? Like, is there a category where because I don't think you should break fellowship with somebody because they're a cessationist, right? But I think that they are living in disobedience to God. Like there is a certain level of like.
So the way I categorize,
I would view it as that, right? I would view it as they're living in.
What I would categorize it as is that I would consider them a Christian, but I wouldn't consider partnering with them in ministry. Right? Because their philosophy of God, their understanding, and I almost want to say like hardcore Calvinists, same category to me. Like, if your thing is talking about how all the terrible things that have happened in the world was God's divine, decree from the beginning of time, and you want to make that your thing,
and it's like the only thing that you talk about.
We'll sort that out in heaven, but you go work over there. I'm going to work over here, because that's just not what I'm about.
Yeah,
do you know what I'm saying? And it to me it twists. It's on the verge of like, I don't know that the God you're worshiping is the same God. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that's as almost, it's like tier 1.5 almost, right? Tier 2 is women in ministry.
I'm going to put that in the
cessationism. And so those are the people that I'm at peace with you, but I'm not building something with you.
But I think that peace, to me though, I think there's layers of peace, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, I think I would put somebody in this secondary category when I'd say, okay, cessationist, women in ministry. I would say people who vote Democrat. Those are the three.
Okay.
And there are different types of people who vote Democrat. That's the other thing. There's like different reasons you vote Democrat, and there's probably different reasons.
I feel like all of those have risen to a near primary. If you're just looking at culture war, all three of those are really, well, cessation is probably not. But.
I think, to me, and this is the way I would process this, is that I think all three of those things are incredibly important, and I do disagree with all three of those things.
Yeah.
However, I do think God has consistently been working through and using and moving in his church in those people. So my point is, I will partner with them, and I will pray with them, and I will worship with them, and I will absolutely partner with them in terms of like doing evangelism, partnering with them.
Yeah. Let's do a community-wide event.
We're going to partner. We're going to do things for the kingdom together. We need to be in unity. We need to pray together, worship together. Now, practically speaking, we probably can't have the exact same church, right? Because that's when we get to the specifics of like, okay, we need rules here. And I would even put that a little bit different because like somebody who votes Democrat, I still think should be absolutely welcome in your church because, because they're not. That's not a
welcomed. Yeah, welcome in certain ways.
I don't know if that makes sense. I still think you can. That's why voting Democrat's almost not even a second. It's not even a theology. It's more of an application of theology. So it's like a weird. It's not even quite the same thing.
But I would put it on par or close to some of the. I was actually interesting. I was reading.
Let's put it this way.
I was reading James. Okay. Yeah. And there's this section in there, and maybe I can pull it up, where he's talking about wisdom that's earthly and demonic.
Yeah.
And when he describes what that wisdom is, it's full of bitter envy and selfish ambition. That's politics, bro. That's total politics. Selfish ambition and bitter envy. And how much of it, I mean, I wrote in my Bible, communism. Because the heart of communism is I have this bitter envy toward those people who've succeeded in ways that I don't feel I capably could, even though I've tried. Yeah. And I want to advance myself in this corrupt way. Mm-hmm. Now, every politically active person
capitalism
is tempted to it. Selfish ambition, to be sure.
Ambition. Yeah. Selfish ambition and bitter envy. Yeah, and the heart of capitalism is capturing the political power so that you can use it to line your own pocketbook.
Capitalism when it becomes fascism. Yeah.
I mean, that's the heart of all big capitalistic systems. Like once it gets beyond the local town and maybe state, it always tends to that category.
Yeah, this is one of the things I saw.
Which is what produces the response of communism. Yeah, in my opinion.
Right. Well, okay.
Well, I'm not saying that communism is any better.
It's a reaction to
much worse.
What you're saying. Yeah. What I've seen is, and that sort of makes sense because when you saw these, mid 1800s super powerful capitalists, especially in the U.S., right, becoming unstoppable, is when then communism explodes into the scene, right? And takes over countries.
And it also, by the way, the only thing that stopped trusts and evil corporations was unions and political government action.
Because they bought the newspapers.
Was actually popular.
They bought the politicians.
It was populism.
Yeah, right.
Populism, the original Teddy Roosevelt, William Jennings Bryan populism is what is.
You know what's interesting though is at the same time that you have the Communist Manifesto arising, right? You have Darwin's evolution arising. You then also have the Second Great Awakening arising. Yeah. And I feel like there's a competing movement. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, temperance is that same type of thing. Temperance came out of the Second Great Awakening, the temperance movement. And that was all connected with populism as well. It was like the temperance movement was an expression of and William Jennings Bryan was also a pacifist. Mm-hmm. He was a strong Christian, William Jennings Bryan. He was like a Quaker, I think. He was a Quaker. I could be wrong with that, which is why he was a pacifist.
That would make sense. Yeah.
But all of that came out of like the Second Great Awakening. It was and it was like the finishing of that was like the amendment that was prohibition. It was literally like the fullness of like this social. I mean, the Second Great Awakening.
Such a miss.
Second Great Awakening was an incredibly social. I mean, but it also led to so many social reforms that were so good.
Yeah.
Like, just like you look at prisons beforehand, you look at like all of these things.
Right.
That it basically was a lot of, honestly, like social
and ending slavery
and ending slavery.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It was literally like these things that would happen in the Second Great Awakening would be like in the front of the church, you'd go get, slain in the spirit and meet. I mean, that's what it was. I mean,
absolutely.
They'd encounter Jesus, and then in the back of the church, you'd sign up as an abolitionist. I mean, that's literally, that's what it was.
Is it the Sawdust Trail? Is that what they called it? Have you heard that phrase before?
It sounds familiar, but
it's like because the aisles were covered in sawdust, so they wouldn't become muddy because they were in tents, these big tents out in fields.
Yeah.
And so you take the old sawdust road down to the front to kneel down and repent. Hey,
well, anyway, we've gone through a lot of this.
I want to pause for a second. Say this podcast is a ministry of the Trinity School, which is a culture building enterprise that targets education, influence, industry, and the arts. If you want more information, go to gracestaten.com/Trinity School. All right, let's get to some relationship stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can I say one last thing?
Sure.
Okay. I don't mean to say that I'm not a capitalist in any way.
Oh,
yeah. Does that
I
make
would say
sense?
I'm a fan of the free market. That's what I say.
I am against corporatism though, and the way that it has. I think that the way that capitalism looks in America, I think it has gotten very, very corrupt. That's all I'll say. I mean, you can. That's just my position, if that makes sense.
What's the root of the word capitalism? Do you know? Like, where did it come from? Because my understanding, and I could be wrong, was that it was coined. Oh yeah, it was coined in 1854 as part of the communist revolution. So what I would say is, I'm not a capitalist. I don't believe in capitalism because capitalism is the centering of massive amounts of wealth in the hands of a few, so that they can invest it into money making schemes and centralize power. And I think that's bad.
If you watched last night at the RNC at the Republican National Convention, the Teamsters president, which is the largest union in America, 1.5 private union. Yeah, which is
NEA is pretty big. Public sector unions are,
which I'm more generally in favor of private unions.
Dude,
than
everything
unions.
terrible, everything that's terrible that happened during COVID in some way was linked to the NEA. It's pretty bad.
I'm still actually not completely against even public sector unions, but that could be aside.
Teamsters.
I am more in favor of private sector unions than I am public sector unions. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
Very much more in favor. And when you listen to that speech, like it is possible that Bernie Sanders could give that speech. Like it's possible. Like at the RNC.
Yeah.
The Republican National Convention. But I agreed with 85% of that speech.
Yeah.
Because probably 90%.
But let me ask you this. If that same speech was given in 1996, right?
Yes.
You wouldn't have disagreed. You would have disagreed with it because corporations hadn't become this corrupting influence on our culture that they have today.
Now, they are. They are a corrupting influence. But also, even his arguments that are purely economic arguments are true. Like, it is absolutely true that we are actually, that we give welfare to these corporations in many ways. Corporate welfare is a real thing.
Sure.
And it's because of the fact that basically just the system, all the way that the system is positioned, creates a system where the wealth does go to 95% of the wealth goes to the hand of 3 people, right? And I think that's when your system goes like that, it's not producing justice. And it's not and I think there is a degree of justice that you can measure by outcomes.
It's not producing justice for the simple reason that power corrupts.
Yes.
It's not wrong to be rich.
Yes.
It's not wrong. In fact,
it's wrong to love money though.
It's wrong to pursue riches. It's wrong to love money.
Yeah.
And I think the love of money at its heart is really the love of power.
Right.
That I get that money so I can have power over others.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's definitely...
That sounds like a relational idea.
Yeah.
Let's talk about relationship for a second. I was having a conversation with a dear friend recently about anger, and I was sort of challenging him on falling into anger on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And what I said to him, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, and this is something I've been pondering for the last couple of years, but I feel like I'm finally getting the words and phrases to be able to teach it. Okay. what I was saying to him was, you're angry. Your anger is trying to protect you from the sadness that you don't want to feel. But if you'll just let the sadness come, then you'll find there's peace on the other side. And what he said was like, I don't know if I can not, he said it in tears, I don't know if I can not feel angry. I don't know how to do it. And I said, yeah, but there's the sadness right there, isn't it? And he sort of couldn't speak from that point on. But I wanted to say that I think that anytime you find yourself or someone you love is in this angry all the time, maybe it's about the same thing repeatedly, or maybe it's just, it's contaminated so many things. And so now everything makes you angry. I want to re-emphasize, I firmly believe now that what it really is you are grieving the loss of a life you expected. And I think that's what midlife crises are. Mm-hmm. A midlife crisis isn't just rebellion. Mm-hmm. It's saying, someone told me that if I worked hard, I would get this life. Yeah. I worked hard and I got that life. Mm-hmm. Where's the life I was promised? And then they run off and try to pursue some fantasy life that's not real because they got lied to. Mm-hmm. But so what they're experiencing, though, is the grief of it's a loss. It's a deep loss about this isn't the life I expected. And what is grief? What do we grieve? Because we have these little griefs all the time, right? Every time we get frustrated, it's, I expected this to happen, right? Think about when you get grumpy in the morning. I got up and I thought it was going to be like this, but in fact, it's like that. And now I'm frustrated. I'm angry. You're grieving that I worked for, invested in, and hoped to have this good thing. It's gone. It doesn't exist. Now I'm first in denial. Then I'm negotiating it, trying to control it. Anger becomes my fuel. In fact, all of that is your pride keeping you from the sadness that you really need to feel in order to go through it, to accept it. And what I was saying to my friend was, on the other side of this anger, the anger that you feel is because you just won't accept this is how things are. You can see things are not right, but accept that that's how they are, and then you're not going to be angry anymore.
Well, and the path towards that is grieving, right?
That's real grieving.
Because
that's
real
right.
grieving gets you to actual acceptance.
Yeah. And that sadness, that place of sadness, there's a helplessness and a humility that God has grace for the humble, right? Yeah.
I've been thinking about James, and I mean, I think that is something that has stood out to me. Has been about, at the beginning of James, you're talking about how do you have joy in suffering.
This is the book of James.
The book of James,
yeah.
Which really should be called the book of Jacob, but which is another story. But the book of James, and it's I think, and I've struggled with this a lot, like when you think about what is joy? What is experiencing full joy? And I don't think that it is the avoiding of grief or the avoiding of sadness, because it's just so true that every time you try to suppress your feelings, you just overall get to kind of a numbed place that the main thing you can feel is anger. That's really the only thing that really remains, is almost like anger, and it's like your primary almost emotion is how angry am I. But when you can feel deep sadness, you can feel so much deeper happiness.
Yeah. Like
it's almost like once you unlock the tears, you can start to like actually cry on both ends, you know, but if you haven't cried in 5 years or 10 years, it's very hard to.
You stopped it up.
You've stopped it up so much.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we see from Jesus. I mean, I think Jesus experiences full emotion.
I've heard several young men tell me, I thought I was supposed to be tough. And so that meant I wasn't supposed to feel this sadness. Yeah. So I stuck it down and felt the anger that goes over top. Because the anger feels strong. Yeah. And toughness means you're strong. It's like, no, that's not toughness. Toughness is hard things come and you say, oh, I know what this is. And it doesn't hit you like it would if you were naive and vulnerable in ways that you shouldn't be, right? But the only way you get to that toughness is that you go through the sadness.
And so I think that's really interesting. And this, to me, this connects to that conversation we had whenever we had
a while back,
about counseling. The thing I think that is important about counseling,
right,
is that and when it's done well, obviously, like I don't know very much, but let's just say ideal forms of counseling.
Yeah.
Is that it's like if you've been stuffing that up for a long time and you don't really even know what made you sad, and you don't even know it's almost just like you've just felt anger and you're just seeing all your life starting to like fall apart because if you're just in this reactionary state,
right?
Having somebody else to help walk that through with you and say like, why, and then to get to actually a place of grieving your pain, and then getting to a place of acceptance and growth.
Yeah.
That unlocks then new growth.
So this is where I've heard of ketamine being used, and I could be wrong on this, but ketamine, when I grew up hearing about it, was a party drug, right?
Yeah.
But what I've heard it being used in counseling settings is with people who are so disconnected from their emotions that they'll take this drug that sort of drops all those inhibitions, and then they'll cry and they'll feel. It's not like I'm going to have some, spiritual experience on mushrooms or whatever.
Yeah.
But rather that this drug is going to break down the walls I've assembled around protecting this heart that's wounded. And now I can find the peace that's on the other side of sadness.
Wow.
I think, man, that could be good.
That could be good. And,
yeah.
Have you seen?
I still don't trust it necessarily.
Have you watched any of Carl Lentz recently? Have you seen him? You know who Carl Lentz is? Carl Lentz was the guy. He is the Hillsong pastor from New York.
Yeah. Didn't he have a podcast with his wife?
Yeah.
Where he's like going through the infidelity that he committed against her?
Yeah.
It feels like a Will Smith in reverse moment here.
No, like it's incredibly powerful.
It's good.
Like watching, he started an ongoing podcast called Lights On.
Okay.
And it is one of the most, like to me, is incredibly powerful and very good. And it is him taking, it's not, like they are fully reckoned. Like it is not them doing this at the same time. He spent 2.5 years healing, in counseling, doing the work, rebuilding the relationship. And now what his heart is like, I'm not going to go be a pastor now. All I want to do though is go help guys and women who have experienced this type of infidelity to know that this is not the end, and how can you actually restore marriages, restore families. And he's doing that just through radical honesty of like, we're just going to talk about this and she's going to talk about it. We're both just going to feel very free to say exactly how we felt, how we feel. And it's not like when you watch in my opinion, when you watch it, it seems incredibly healthy. Like I
did see a short clip from it.
And I think it might be hard to get in a clip or two, but I think when you watch like a fullness of the interview, now he's which I think a man should be actually. He does, especially when you've committed sin like that. I think you need to be very quick to own how much damage you've caused. Like
he's not there to rationalize it.
He's not there to rationalize it. He's there to say like, this is my fault.
Yeah.
And this is we have been rebuilding because of my fault. But he's like, but then discovering the reason why I was driven into, really he was a drug addict and a lot of things. Was really Adderall that he needed the buzz, right? And so he went and he looked for a buzz in a bunch of different places.
Yeah.
But then I found it really encouraging because so many pastors fall and you never hear from them again.
Okay, so there's been a lot of pastors falling lately.
Yeah.
I just heard of another mega church closing down in Lexington, Kentucky, because one of the pastors was arrested for having sex with a 15-year-old. But this is like the fourth big church. Little churches,
Gateway one with like
that was in Dallas, Texas,
right? Where he had.
That was a 12-year-old girl.
With a 12-year-old girl.
That he had some kind of ongoing molestation for like 4 years. And that one is weird. And then Matt Chandler's got something going with his dad. Have you heard about this one? Where his dad was a custodian in the church. Okay. And this one I feel like is gray, but there's a lot of people jumping on it. So his dad
is recent? This is pretty recent?
This is like this last week.
Because I heard about it.
So Chandler's dad was a custodian in the church. Well, it turns out some 30 years ago, he had some conviction around sexual abuse of a minor. And then it was not made known. He was brought on staff, but not in a pastoral sense at all, just like cleaning the church. And so now people are saying, well, was it covered up? Was it, and then some staff members found out about the background thing, and then they were maybe pressured to not say anything, and now it's become just public.
Wow.
So all that is weird, right? Because you need to restore people to Christ. And if they repent and show faithfulness in facing the evil, Christ can redeem that. Right?
And it wasn't like he was putting him in a children's ministry. It was like...
Yeah, but it's like,
but
okay,
it is still,
but he's in the building during the week, and there's no custodians on duty at church, but who's in the building during the week? All that stuff. There is a trust that you put into anyone who works in a church.
That's true.
It's definitely gray area at best.
Yeah, it's not as clear as somebody,
But I mean, I was reading question marks now because there's all these other churches when they see this stuff happening that they're putting out these like, don't talk bad about the Lord's anointed. Right, so Bill Johnson keeps posting these, and now the rumors are stirring of
He's still saying that?
Yeah, like this week he put another thing out, a whole teaching about whenever you criticize God's people, and all this stuff.
I mean, I remember watching when Mike Bickle, right before all the stuff with Mike Bickle came out, his last sermon was basically...
a total manipulation.
It was literally like, I just had this vision from God that he downloaded this stuff, and it's about how we're going to be attacked with betrayal within the church.
Yeah.
And I'm just... It's so...
So what people are saying is, okay, when's the other shoe going to drop for Bethel? Because there's been rumors, of these different things, but nobody really has anything concrete.
They have a very strong honor culture, too, that is obviously, like, when you're preaching that from the pulpit.
And honor cultures, hands down, produce cover-ups.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you protect the leader.
So to me, kind of circling back to emotion, working through things, and Carl... He is honestly one of the first pastors.
Carl. You guys are on a first name basis.
Carl Lentz. He's one of the first, and I'm not saying he's even from a strong theological tradition or anything like that.
No. He's a Hillsong pastor in New York City. He was famous because he wore a lot of designer clothes. He went on The View.
Yes.
And Justin Bieber went to his church.
That's right.
Okay, good.
Yeah, a lot of famous. He was just in a lot of famous circles, and he's
just a handsome man.
Yeah, and he was not, like, I would never have, like, trusted his teaching or, like... done things. I did not trust him at all when he was around. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Because it felt very fake.
It was very celebrity focused pastoring. Yeah, for sure.
But now listening to him, it's one of the first times I've seen somebody come back around after something like that and just be so humble and honest about like, I'm not here to be a pastor again, which I feel like is so often.
But humble at the same time on a podcast with a big name. There is a little bit of a put yourself on the public pedestal again. I'm skeptical, as you can.
I mean,
sense.
I'm not saying that. I think you're right. I think that it's not like I'm not here to like say it's great in every respect.
Right.
I do think that they're like even listening to that one podcast that I listened to. This was one was more focused on his wife, and she was just talking about this stuff, and it's very interesting. But getting to the end of it, it was like, okay, but this is actually really incredibly. I got to the end, I was like, this is just encouraging from a just blatant. Let's talk about sin and how to heal from sin and how to
facing it
and how to face it.
There's something admirable that you're putting your own garbage out there.
And these podcasts are like brutal. Like, and I will say, like, yeah, it does feel maybe a little bit like Will Smith. I don't think it feels like that though, because you can tell how restored they are. Does that make sense? And even the way she talks about it is always like, there's been this even mutual understanding of like, of just basically how do you restore actual trust? How do you restore actual, and not just for the purposes of, X, Y, and Z. Anyway, so all that being said, circling back to anger, sadness, counseling.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think that's right. I think that it's the unmet expectations. I also think the other thing is, I think this comes back to this is a book that was written like in 2003. It's like The Wild at Heart was this one. I think he gets at a lot of this stuff too. Like there's this deep question that a guy has, which is, do I have what it takes?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of those questions. And the secondary, which I think is below that question actually, and I think this is one that men are probably a little less comfortable asking, which is like, am I loved? And am I like
worthy of love?
Do I have the love of my Father?
Yeah.
And I think when you have the love of your Father and if you've grown up in a place where you were safe, you were loved by your Father in a good way, and you were learned how to like be initiated by your Father. I think that's probably the healthy place.
Yeah.
The most healthy place that you can come from. And I think that there's just so many people who are not initiated by their Father. They weren't like loved. I think they were loved, but they weren't like seen and loved by their Father in a way that's connect. I don't know if I'm explaining it right.
I think so. Yeah.
They didn't receive an identity and a name from their father. They didn't receive the blessing. Let's put it that way. They didn't receive the blessing from their father. Does that make sense? It's like
you're making a Jacob and Esau
so
reference.
like in the Old Testament, this was the thing, right? You'd get to your father would be about to die, and your life would be, and you would get your name, your true identity from your father, and your father would bless you and would tell you things about you. This is your name. This is what God has for you.
So Jacob does this. Isaac does this.
Isaac does this. Yeah.
Did Abraham? There's nothing jumps to mind when Abraham speaks.
I don't know if he does.
At the end of his life.
I think it may say that he blessed him. I don't think it says that he said.
Okay, so here's what I would argue with that, and that is that Jacob in the end has to wrestle with God for the blessing, even if he had a great relationship with his dad. No matter how good your relationship with your dad, he's just meant to show you your heavenly Father.
No, that's exactly right. And that's exactly right. That's what John Eldridge says in this book. That's what I believe.
Yeah.
Is that your goal is to be fathered by God, to learn how to then wrestle.
Yeah, there it is.
And what I would say too is that you want to discover your unique. This is one thing that I've just recently been discovering, has just been this idea of the unique love God has for you. Mm-hmm. That there is a name and a uniqueness to the way God sees you, just like you have a uniqueness to every kid. You have every kid, there's a unique love you have for your kid.
Is there a secret name that God's given each of us when we get to heaven? Isn't there something about this? There's a stone with your name on it. True name?
Yeah. Something like that.
I'm not familiar. It's only known by God. It's something in Revelation. I'll have to look it up.
I think that to me is it. You wrestle with God
to get
until you start to discover his identity, his name, the names or the I think that, I don't know if everyone's given a specific, but these things that he thinks about you, his identity, the words, the calling, the life he has for you.
Right.
What he sees when he thinks you. And then from there, I think you start to find freedom to then live out of that true identity as opposed to these false identities that you're trying to create from yourself out of maybe anger and compensation.
Yeah, and part of me is right there with you every step of the way, and then part of me is resisting, and here's why.
Yeah.
There's this weird tension that's present in the gospel where we were talking about this, actually. We took kids to summer camp, right, for Young Life, and they're presenting the gospel to these kids, and it was really well done this year. Mm-hmm. And one of the words that kept coming up is worthy. Worthy is like, I'm careful with that word, because worthy is the lamb, right? No one else is worthy.
Worthy is the lamb.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And central to their messaging through the week was the story of the prodigal son, where there's this moment where he says to his father upon returning in shame, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Mm. And yet, he's considered valuable by the father. Mm-hmm. So worthy means you have worth. So built into this, and Jesus reiterates that when he talks about the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector who go to the temple. My identities might be wrong, but those, a religious man and a lowly sinner. They're both in the temple.
Yeah.
And the religious man says, God, thank you that I'm not like other people, that you've protected me, right?
It's a real Matt Walsh approach. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm just kidding. This is interesting.
We've all been there. I have been there, 100%. I've literally prayed probably a prayer exactly like that in my life.
Okay, so here's my argument, and I'll see if you're with me on it, is every time we say, there but for the grace of God go I, we are taking the position of that man.
We are.
Which means you are putting yourself above others and then expecting to go to God and have God verify it.
Yeah.
Whereas the other man says, God, I'm not even worthy to look to heaven.
Yeah.
Right? And Jesus says, that man walked away with his sins forgiven. And the other guy, his sins remain because he doesn't consider them to be significant. Yeah. So I think, oh man, we have to all wrestle with that all the time, because at the heart of the gospel is you're not worthy.
Yeah.
But yet he considered you valuable, which means you have worth.
Yeah.
So what I worry about when we talk about getting from God our sense of worth is that we'll be walking around with this high self-esteem, looking down on others.
Yeah.
And somehow our calling is to stay in that humble place of saying, I'm not even worthy to receive this, and yet you give it. Mm-hmm. That's what it means to walk with God.
I love this conversation because I think it is the heart of it's the heart. I mean, that is the heart. That's the truth. That's the heart. I think it's this both and of if you've read like or heard of like the Ragamuffin Gospel, or like or maybe Gentle and Lowly is a good maybe expression of this.
I've heard of that one.
And basically it's that really emphasizes God's heart towards you, that you are loved, you are worthy, like that's going to be the emphasis of that, right? What does my Father say? The compassionate heart of God, right? And then you're going to have on the flip side, the reactions to that have been from John MacArthur, and even I actually consider John Mark Comer's new book a reaction to that, Practicing the Way, and the Gospel According to Jesus, which is basically the Lordship Gospel, that you are saved to not only have a Savior, but a Lord, right? That you are loved, and the grace of God is so much more than you can imagine, and the obedience. And they respond to that by saying we're called to lives of obedience and holiness, right? Like we need to be made holy. And I really recently have been thinking a lot about how I think that these are just both true. And I don't know how to reconcile them entirely, but I know that they're both true. I think that what it is the humble, God exalts.
That's right.
That when you humble yourself before the living God, he will exalt you.
Yeah.
It's that when you exalt yourself,
right,
you will be humbled.
Man, that's so fundamental. Yeah. And it's so neglected on our part. And I say ours, yours and mine as leaders, right?
Yeah.
Of why have we not emphasized more humble yourself before the Lord? And then he will exalt you in due time. And then
he will exalt you.
I was thinking earlier about when Carl Lentz, and I was thinking about the church I grew up in made a big push about cultural engagement. And one of the ways they would do it is promoting a pursuit of celebrity, right? That we need more celebrity Christians. You should feel called by God to go be a Hollywood actor, or director, or musical, right?
Yeah.
And what I saw among my peers hearing this growing up was this like intense, insecure hunger for affirmation getting directed into like, oh, I could go be a Hollywood star where everyone will applaud me. And to the man, everyone that I saw go down there to LA and think they were going to make it and they were called of God, crumble. Not only crumble in their pursuit, right? They didn't become famous, but in their faith.
I'm really glad
you got intercepted.
No, I mean, so true. That's where I was going to go. That was literally my goal. And it was literally like God just kept me and preserved me until he finally like started to humble me.
Right.
Like, and I think that, but it makes sense because those who exalt themselves will be humbled. And that's, I think, so often, actually what's happening with these pastors even. Like, I think, and myself too, like I'm guilty of this, 100% I'm guilty of this. The exaltation of self, the exaltation of like, it's actually not about God, or you think it's about God, but it's really become that I'm indispensable for God.
Yes, that's right.
That like how lucky God is to be able to use me. Like.
Okay, so is that the grief? So I'm hyper focused on the grief cycle, and I might totally be wrong on this, but I keep thinking there's this impulse. Whenever I see the impulse to control things, right?
Yeah.
I think it's that we're grieving the loss that this isn't turning out the way I thought it was going to turn out. I've got to control it, right? Which negotiation is one of the phases of grief, right? One of the cycles or stages. Anyway, and so okay, we're in ministry. We have this vision for transformation, for the presence of God, for mission, right? Those three, here they are, the three circles. And and so then when it's not happening, maybe it's anger, maybe it's first denial, but then it's, I'm going to control this, which almost every pastor I've ever met would say, this is where I struggle, is that I get too controlling. And almost every housewife I've ever met says the same thing. And so what that is saying, I've refused to accept the life I have because I have this image of the life I should have, I wish I had, I expected, I hoped for, I invested in, I tried to build, and now maybe it's gone. I'm not sure if it's gone. Let me keep controlling it, right? And I think that puts you're putting yourself into God's position, right?
That's it.
Because it's pride. Pride is saying, I don't need God to do this. I got to do it. Yeah.
It's also not. And I'm trying to relate this a little bit to repentance and humbling yourself, the second piece. And I think that is what grief is in many ways. And I think often grief is even related to like, I'm going to humble myself. Again, you said this too. It's grief is humbling. Yeah. Grief is saying, I'm not in control of what happened. I've sinned. I have been sinned against, and I have no control over the world. And I'm not going to control God. I'm not going to get God to be. God is not going to be my tame lion. God is God is a lion beyond myself. He is a personality. He is above and beyond, and he alone is worthy. I mean, I think that is where it starts. I mean, that is what happens.
Yeah.
But what I've discovered at times, at least in my life, and I don't know if you've experienced this too, that it's when I humble myself, it's when I'm overcome by my own sin or my own sense that and grief is the same way. That when I'm confronted by my own sin or my own grief, my temptation is to pull away from God. My temptation is to say, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to control this.
Yeah, that's right.
But when I release it and I go and I kneel before God and I surrender myself to God and I say, like I'm a sinner, like save me.
I'm no longer worthy to be
I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. That's when he meets us with the robe of righteousness and says, no, there's a feast for you. And it's my thought, and it's not you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think I was just thinking that statement, I'm no longer worthy, is a statement of sadness, right? Yeah. And that's why Jesus can say, blessed are those who mourn, right? Because how does it begin? Blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn. So poor is, I failed. And now, in your failure, you can either be humble or proud. That's it, right? Those are your two choices. So pride leads you to anger and control. Or some people just in denial, right? What do you mean I failed, right? Humility leads you through those into the sadness. And so that's where people, when I see people, even in depression, what they're really stuck in is, I'm mourning, but I'm not mourning with God. So the pride is still keeping you from God, even though you're in the sadness. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But when you're in the sadness and you reach out to God, which is where true humility lies, that's when the grace comes. He gives grace to those who are humble, which are those who mourn.
And I think it turns. I think about there's one of the. Maybe we could even end with this passage from James. The James about turning your because this is exactly what you're.
Yeah. Although this is talking about rich people now.
No, I think this one isn't, but maybe I think it might be referencing. I think it might be. I don't know. I don't know the context as well enough. But talking about turning your sadness into.
Yeah.
Is that rich people?
Yeah. Let's find it though.
I think it probably can be applied to most sins, but
okay. Yeah. So this might be what I'm looking at. This is chapter 5. It says, "Come now, you rich people, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have corroded, and their corrosion will serve as a testimony against you, and will consume your flesh like fire." Dude.
So that's not.
That's not what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm talking about right before that, which actually helps give context to that.
Yeah.
To that as well, which I think is.
So this is good. Chapter 4.
This is 4.
Okay.
So I'll read. I'll start in 4. So he's talking about people. I think so. You adulterous people. Don't you know that?
What verse are we in?
So we're in 4:4. Start at 4:4.
Okay.
You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity with God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Or do you think Scripture says without reason that he jealously longs for the Spirit he has caused to dwell in us, but he gives more grace? That is why the Scripture says God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve. Mourn and wail.
Yeah.
Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up.
Okay, so this is full circle here because we were talking about capitalists and wealthy people, right? And you see in chapter 5 that he turns his real vengeance on the wealthy, which is, and I knew this, but I didn't. You know what I'm saying? Because we've been studying this lately, which is what he's talking about when he says, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? What is the world? It's the system of wealth and power that those in control of that system are always pursuing.
Absolutely.
It's like, I remember as a middle school teacher when I realized, because as a middle schooler, I didn't know this, but as an adult, right, you start to see dynamics to the middle school world. I realized that the kids who are the popular kids, right, who seem to have all this power and influence, they're all constantly jockeying for position, and no one is secure in who they actually are. Now, they're definitely believe they're better than everyone else.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. They're not unprideful, right? But they're insecure because it's never enough and it's never for sure. So you're always trying to prove that you're the best. And so you have no real friendships. You have no real trust. Well, that's the political, everything that's going on in middle school is going on in the whole world, right? And it's that system of always trying to prove, always trying to attain. It's never enough. Power and greed. That's the world. That's what the Bible's talking about. And he says, if that's what you're doing, you've left God long ago. You cannot pursue that. Now, God may give you wealth, and you better be faithful with it. But if you're chasing it, you're done.
I think if you hear that story, like, actually, I'm not going to anyone this. I think for me, personally, in my personal experience, that is, like what you just described is exactly what God has just been like pushing on my heart about how you cut yourself, because for me, I wanted to be a movie director. I wanted to be the president of the United States. I wanted to go prove myself.
This is you as a young man.
This is you as me as a young man,
careers and calling and all that.
Stuff like that. And then God, called me into I think ministry and being a pastor and that down that line. But that desire to prove and earn is not gone. And what I would do is I get into this place of, and I still do this, by the grace of God, it has diminished. Like I can feel it diminishing as I've confessed it, but like it basically turned everything into a competition. And people were things to be fixed, and it was like the people I was doing ministry with are the people that I need to do better than them at. And I really just need to get in a place where I can go do this by myself, so that I can have the control. And that's what God really wants of me. I'm saying this sarcastically, obviously, but this is what I was deep down believing.
This is what you're believing,
is that God really wants to get me free from all the constraints of other people, so that I can really live out the calling or the anointing or whatever. Which is isolation.
Leads you away.
And by the grace of God, man, just confronting me. And I wondered why friendships were becoming so difficult. Like to really talk about what I felt, or really talk about just struggle. It felt like I was always saying something along the lines of like, well, things are going good, Right. And I'm not saying that means that you make up like sins to confess. But what I realized was that
which I've seen that done too.
But I realized that the sin to confess was a little bit less porn those days, and it was more actually pride, which is a worse sin.
Yeah.
And when it started to hit me, it did become overwhelming.
Yeah.
But the first time I confessed it, and it's something I continue to struggle with, continue to fast, and continue to be like, it is such a seed that's so insidious, like when your motives are laid bare before you, like, what is your pure motive? But it was like it was that very thing. I remember that when it was really first, and it hit me, man, like somebody punched me, like just how much it started to hit me. Like it was one of those passages about the Pharisees.
Yeah.
And it was how God resists. God doesn't want to draw near to the Pharisees.
Yeah.
He wants to draw near to the tax collectors because they know their need. They're hungry. They're poor. And it was just this moment of like, I don't want to draw near to you when you think this, when you're like this.
Yeah, it's pushing me away.
But But when you humble, but then the devil was like, okay, so you should just stay away. But then it was like, no. Humble yourself, and he will draw near. And he did, and he does.
Yep.
I think this is such an important truth.
Yeah.
I think for men in particular, this is an incredible truth. And what I also discovered is that I think that it's not that we just feel and we experience God's love for just that, which I think it is true, that it should be satisfying to us, and it will be the greatest thing.
Yeah.
But what I actually feel like God's love the most in is that when he gets you to that point, he says, you're loved. You're loved. Look at the grace I've given you that you did not deserve.
Yep. Right.
Like, look at the weight of mercy. Like, look at the weight of mercy you've been given. Look how you don't deserve it. And now you, this wretch who didn't deserve it, is going to be used by me.
Right.
And that's grace. Like, the fact that we don't deserve it. We aren't worthy of it in terms of, that's a tricky word. Worthy is such a tricky word. You're so right. We don't deserve it. That's for sure. I'll say that for sure. We don't deserve it. And yet, you've been given the honor to partner with me in being like an ambassador in my kingdom.
Right. Unworthy and yet chosen.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many references I want to jump into this, but I think we should end on that.
Yeah.
And maybe we can discover some of those next time.
I think we should. I mean, like some of these conversations, like just noting like where we left off and to continue some of these are good. And I feel like some of these are actually continuations of conversations we've been having.
Oh yeah.
That seem like they're just getting deeper.
Because they're so fundamental.
Right. So good.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, you've been listening to On Second Thought. If you enjoyed this episode, if you found something to reconsider, we ask you to share it with a friend, start a good conversation, and then let us know about it. Remember, dig a little deeper, think again, and we will see you next time.